𝗂𝒂𝒓𝒅, and this is your spiritual game plan. Change. It's something that happens to all of us. You've invested your time and energy into an important role, sometimes for years, and then suddenly it's time for you to move on. Maybe you've worked hard on a dream, and now your path is taking a new turn, but that dream isn't going with you. Perhaps you've raised your kids and they've moved on, but now your empty nest is filled with parent care. Or maybe you're in the middle of diaper changes and laundry piles. If you find yourself asking questions like, where do I fit in anymore? Am I even relevant? How do I find my purpose now? You are in the right place. This is the show for women in a season of transition. I believe that while your roles in life will change, your purpose is eternal. I'm here to help you understand just how intentionally you were made by a creator with a game plan. Together, we'll discover ways to help you unlock the purpose God's placed in you, develop a game plan for your life's calling, and embrace the intentional masterpiece you were created to be. Hi, you guys. I am so glad that you are here with me in this last full week of August. I can't believe how fast summer went by. I know here in Tennessee, schools are back in session. And for my friends out west, you have a couple more weeks. And I hope that you're enjoying the last few days of summer wherever you are at. I have a question for you guys. Have you ever stopped to really understand that God created us with plans for us to reflect Him? And the enemy has a plot, and that plot is to tell us we need to be better. He even wants us to reflect other people and not who we are. Ever since time, this has been a full spiritual battle to keep us wanting more. If Satan can keep us busy with wanting to be like someone else or have something that we don't have, and then believe that if we get to the next level, we'll be happy or complete or fulfilled, then he keeps us focused on our own ideals. If this were true, if there was something that could make us happier, more complete, and fulfilled, then why are we continuing to chase being better? Surely there'd be an end in sight if that was achievable. My guest, Heather Creekmore, is going to remind us that there is no top rung in the ladder of comparison. Heather would even ask you, being better than who? Or she might say, are you trying to be better than who you were? Not all striving to get better at something is bad, but we need to keep God's words ahead of our own thoughts of what it means to be better. God defines success a lot differently than we do. In this episode, I will be talking with Heather about her new book, The Burden of Better. Heather is also the author of Compared to Who and the host of the Compared to Who podcast. Heather is going to leave us with a game plan that we can implement today to discover rest from the burden of better. Heather, I am so thankful that you are joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be with you, Sherry, as always.
So I'm going to give our listeners just a tiny little bit of history on
Okay.
how we met. It was through your first book, Compared to Who. And I wanted to use it in a study. And so I reached out just kind of hoping maybe I would be able to get a case of those books at a little bit of a better price. And you were so generous to give me, I think it was like over 130 books that I was able to use on a campus for a ministry with young women. So I was so honored that you did that. And it's brought us together, and I think it's made a great friendship. And so I've also had you, we went live on my Facebook at one point when we talked about Compared to Who. So I'm honored that you're now a guest on my podcast.
Woohoo.
love it if you would give the listeners a little bit of history about you and your family and how God has been using your ministry this past year.
Oh, absolutely, Sherry. Well, I tell you, you have been a huge encouragement to me. So I would be remiss if I didn't tell all your listeners about how many messages I would get from you. I think it was every Wednesday morning where you were praying for me. And so that was hugely important in my life and in my ministry. So you've been a tremendous blessing. But like you said, 2017, I released a book called Compared to Who, all about my body image issues. And I think that is a segue for me to tell everyone that I am doing things that I never thought in a million years I would be doing, because these are the issues, body image issues, comparison issues, like we're going to talk about today. These are the issues that no one wants to talk about out loud, at least, right? Like we're talking about them in our head. We've got that nonstop conversation in our head going on about these things. So what I do is mostly I'm a mom of 4. I homeschool our kids. I'm married to a Marine fighter pilot turned pastor, so I'm a pastor's wife. But but part of what God has led me into really over the last 5 or 6 years is ministering to women on these topics like body image, like comparison. So I've got 2 books out. I do my own podcast called Compared to Who. I do some speaking and writing and all the things. And it's been a journey. It's definitely been a journey.
I love it. I love how God, calls us out on our calling.
Right.
Yeah, I love it. He calls us to use what we struggle with and turn it around to help others. And so I'm so glad you are doing that. So I'm going to have some fun facts before we get into the nitty gritty. And you and I share an untalent.
Yes.
An untalent. That is our baking abilities. The difference between you and I with our untalent is that I didn't go to the lengths that you went to prove that hiring me to make your wedding cake's not a good idea. So I'd love if you would share a little secret about your baking experience.
Yes. Well, some of your listeners or viewers may recognize me from my appearance on Netflix hit show Nailed It. I actually did such a lousy job baking on that show that they took the episode that we had recorded as episode 3 and they made that the pilot for the show. In fact, I mean, the show's like in its 7th season now. This was back in 2017, but season 1, episode 1, you'll find me, and you may have seen, if you were on Netflix, probably between 2017 and 2018, a picture of this Cookie Monster blue 3-layer wedding cake that was tilted to the side. And then you probably saw a red stained hand because of a fondant that had been colored. That red stained hand and that cake, they were mine. That was all my work. So yeah,
lovely.
it was a great time. It was evidence that God really does know us intimately, because it had always been a dream of mine to be on a baking show. But like you, I'm an awful baker. So how is God going to make that happen? I mean, that's kind of like praying that God would let me play in the Super Bowl, right? But somehow, some way, God found the baking show that was perfect for me, and it was a tremendous blessing to be a part of it.
I don't think I could be even on a baking show, because I couldn't even do as good as you did on that cake. But we'll put some links in so people can go and find that. So
sounds good.
So one question I ask every guest is, looking back in your life, how far back can you see the very purpose that you are living out today in who you have always been?
Yeah. So probably starting in, I'm going to say late elementary school, but certainly by middle school, I knew I wanted to be a broadcaster. And so I would take, if we got a big box, like an appliance box, I would take that box and I would cut a big, now, remember, this is like 70s and 80s. So our televisions were not flat screen. were boxes, right? And so I would take a box and I would cut out that kind of like ovally rectangle shape out of the box, and I would stick it over my head and I would say, "Good evening, this is NBC Nightly News with Heather Creekmore." Or well, my name wasn't Creekmore then. but I would pretend I was broadcasting. I've had this passion for television, for radio. In college, I did radio stuff, and that was my major in college was communication. And so I knew I had this passion for communicating. I didn't know what that would be about, but I can clearly see that God was preparing me for this path by giving me this love, and that love led to getting some training and skill building opportunities, through schooling. I got to, in high school even, I was going behind the scenes of our local television news station because I thought maybe I wanted to be in production. And so I've had the opportunity to learn about both sides of the camera and use that really, through my career, my other career that I had before I started writing and speaking. And so, yes, God has just been faithful to set me up well to do what I'm doing now.
I love hearing all the stories from how God has, put his fingerprint on you. So like I mentioned in the introduction, you helped me supply the books for high school girls that I was doing a 6-week study with. And during that study, one of the things I had them do was take a note card and finish the sentence, "I am." And it was anonymous. So they would fold the note card in half, and then I collected them. And not one of those cards came back with any acknowledgement that they were fearfully and wonderfully made. Their answers were heartbreaking. I still have the cards. And I read them out loud in an all-girls chapel so that each person could hear what others think about themselves. Right. And I read them out loud, and then I said, okay, now I'm going to read a couple out loud, and I'm going to add at the end of that statement, compared to who? So, I'm ugly. Compared to who? I'm not lovable. These are real answers. People said, I was a mistake. I'm not lovable. And then I'd say, compared to who? Because I think when girls compare themselves, they really have to, I love your book. They have to know what they're comparing themselves to. It's usually an ideal and not a reality.
Right.
And so I know that we're going to be talking about your new book today, The Burden of Better, but I really believe that they're so much together, like volume 1 and volume 2 in your book. So I would love it if you'd give us just a little short look at Compared to Who, which is also the name of your podcast. And then how did that segue into your new book, The Burden of Better?
Yeah. Well, so Sherry, as you're saying that, I am flashing back in my mind, and I'm going to get emotional because I'm flashing back in my mind to you sending me those pictures of those girls holding my book. And man, I was just like, it was my first book, a first time author, and seeing those girls holding the book thinking, oh, wow, God, I didn't think you could use it like that. In some ways, I think, especially for those of us who write, I think you feel like you have to write because you just have a message that you need to kind of get off your chest. You need to just get this message out there. And you kind of become self-focused in that, right? Like, I need to get the book deal. I need to get the book out. My words need to go out. And I can see those pictures. I mean, they're still on my computer, but I can see those pictures so clearly in my head. And that it knocked me over with God's grace of, no, God, this wasn't about me. This was about having the opportunity to impact those girls. So like you said, the book, my conviction in writing the book was I was someone who struggled with body image starting in 3rd grade. I can vividly remember the time I looked in the mirror, decided my legs were too big, and started comparing myself to other women. And that led to a whole journey of disordered eating and all the things for me. And I was raised in a Christian home. I had read all the books. I had read the Christian books on, just remember you're fearfully and wonderfully made and you're God's masterpiece. And none of those words ever infiltrated my heart in a way to change me. And so really, I wrote Compared to Who out of my experience in God showing me that I had a bigger problem than just, not having the fearfully and wonderfully made verse memorized, that my problem was much deeper. And so compared to who is my journey and just really the solution that God showed me from his word, that was a solution I had never even considered possible. And so that's what that book is. And then it led to the second book, The Burden of Better, because I had a lot of readers that read Compared to Who, and they were like, okay, I think we're good on the body image thing. Like, I feel like I'm doing okay there. Now, how am I supposed to stop comparing my marriage or lack thereof? How am I supposed to stop comparing my home? How am I supposed to stop comparing my kids, my job, all these things? And I was like, yeah, that's a good question. And so it really, for me, it was a journey of saying, okay, God, yeah, I hear there's a need for this. I see there's a need for this. I mean, we live in a culture that is so infiltrated with messages coming at us from every direction about what we should look like, be like, do, like all these messages coming at us from social media, from television, from, every place. What is the answer? And so that was really where Burden of Better was born, and God took me on a journey to show me what I believe he showed me was the way out of comparison.
So I read in your book that you actually, when you were younger, had a note card that you kept on your computer, and you called it your mantra. Mm-hmm. What did that card say, and how did that impact the life choices that you made at that time?
Yeah. So the card said, and it was from a book of these like little like lessons to live by postcards that you could like rip out. And it said, commit yourself to constant improvement. And it was on my computer. Before I had a computer, it was just on my desk. And that was my life mantra, constant improvement. Like, why settle for good when you could be better? Or really what I was saying in my heart was, when you could be the best. I was striving for the best. No one just strives to be better. You strive to be the best. So, it almost seemed Christian, honestly, Sherry, right? Because like I was raised in churches where, like God wants us to excel and succeed, and it's not that those messages were wrong. It's just there's some nuance to it, right? Where it's like, yes, but on his path, right? And he defines success differently than we define success. And so all of those things kind of got convoluted in my head. And I was just, born type A, firstborn, all the things. Like, it wasn't hard for me to latch onto that, be the best, and put that into every area of my life, from the way I looked to the way I worked, to relationships. I remember when my husband and I first got married, I was like, we need a better marriage. Why? Because everyone else has a better marriage. We need to have a better marriage than they have. And he was like, how do you know what's going on in these other people's marriages? I don't, but I just know we should be better. Read this book. So.
Yeah, that is so true. And, I didn't have that card on my computer, but I did have it in my head. Mm-hmm. I had those words where it was like, you can do better, you can do better, or even being told, do your best. And then you're like, well, what is my best? Is my best like her best, or like her best? And it's just natural, I think.
Right. Well, and I think, so I do coaching now. And one thing I find in common with a lot of my clients, and I bet this will ring true for you as well, there's no middle ground between doing your best and I'm lazy, right? It's like, if you're not trying to do better, you are being lazy. And I don't actually think that that's biblical, but I feel like this is just something that kind of, this programming gets stuck in us, where unless I'm driving hard, I'm slacking off. I don't know. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Because I'm a firstborn type A, let's just go. I've even been nicknamed Steamroller, and so.
Oh, right there with you. Watch out for her.
Yes, it's like, okay, you're not doing it the right way, move over.
Mhm.
It's so, yeah, I completely understand and relate to that. And so, but and I'm thankful that I wasn't raised in the era of social media.
Mhm.
I mean, I had limited access to TV. My parents were very strict on what we even got to watch and how much of it. And back then, my age here, we had antennas.
Mhm. We did too.
And so it was like you had like 3 channels.
Mhm.
And so, but even without social media, I believe that we were programmed on this earth, um, and we're being told that we need more, we need better, but we need to find it on our own. That we deserve these things, and if we look like this, if we live like that, if we love, if we get to these places, then all these things are gonna fall in place. But if that were true, then why are we still chasing better?
Right. Right. And the interesting thing about better is that it's a comparative adjective. So I teach a English grammar class. So if you Google better, it will come up comparative adjective. And so what that really means is you cannot have better outside the realm of comparison. So I like to say comparison's ladder has no top rung. And likewise, unless you're comparing, you can never find better. And so it is a nonstop chase. So think about the person that you're comparing yourself to that in your mind has the quote unquote best body or the best job or whatever it is, wherever the areas that you're most likely to compare. You can look at that person and you can just know 100% that there's someone in their mind that's better than them, quote unquote better than them, that they're comparing themselves to. So there is no top rung. There's no place to rest when you are chasing better. It's such an intangible. It's so amorphous. You're not going to arrive there, and so it's a nonstop treadmill, and you're stuck. And I think that God calls us to a different way. He tells us in Matthew that, his yoke is easy, his burden is light. Chasing better is a burden that is heavy because there's never any rest. And, back in Deuteronomy, there's an interesting passage where, God's reminding his people to take a Sabbath. And he's telling them to take a Sabbath because they are no longer slaves in Egypt. And I think the takeaway there is the difference between a slave and a free man or free woman is the ability to rest. And so if we don't have the ability to rest in our pursuits, then we are not free. We are enslaved to those pursuits, right? And that's not how we're supposed to live. We are supposed to be a slave to Jesus, right? That's what Paul calls himself. He's a slave to Christ, but we're not supposed to be a slave to all of these dreams and goals and plans that we have. That's bondage, and that's what Jesus died to free us from.
I love that. You know, that's the very first thing that the serpent told Eve. You can be better.
Right.
You
Right.
aren't good enough. You can be better.
Right.
Compared to who?
Right. Exactly. She didn't even have anyone
She
compared
didn't
to the giraffe.
No, it's like she didn't have the Housewives of Eden or anything like that. Like, who's she comparing herself to? And yet he's like, oh, you're not quite good enough, and God doesn't want you to be good enough.
Yeah.
So if you do this, you'll be better.
Yeah.
And so it's just
better life.
mhm. And immediately bondage, right? Immediately we're into
Right.
bondage.
And shame.
And
And
shame.
shame, like so much of what weighs us down, like just thinking about body image, right? What weighs us down is the shame we feel because we haven't reached better yet. And as already discussed, there's no reaching better. So that means there's no relief for the shame, right?
Yeah.
And so we see that with Adam and Eve's story, right? Immediately they felt that shame. And now, we can live with the truth that Jesus died for our sin and for our shame. We can be free from it, but then we start chasing these false betters and we take that shame right back.
Yeah. Well, Eve standing at the tree naked.
Mm-hmm.
She's naked, right? He doesn't say, if you eat this fruit, you'll never have cellulite. He doesn't say, right? He attacks her mind because he knows once I am in her mind, she'll do the rest herself.
Right.
And she didn't feel shame until she ate that fruit.
Right.
Until then, she didn't know that shame, and that
Right.
it's just the enemy is just so wicked,
Mm-hmm.
so wicked. So in one of your chapters in this book, you talk about escaping the trap. Like we just said, I mean, the enemy's laying this trap because we always as long as we're comparing and trying to better ourselves, we're not living out the very purpose that God created, which is to reflect Him.
Right.
And so in this chapter, I love that you call these me reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You call them me reasons, and that we need to stop the me reasons and turn our attention to the he reasons. Love it if you unpack that.
Sure. So, we've seen the memes. You've probably pressed like on Instagram. Comparison is a thief of joy. Stop comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlights reel. Like all these things. So there's a lot of reasons out there why we should stop comparing for our own personal good, right? It doesn't help your relationships with other women if you are secretly hating them because they're skinnier than you are, right? It doesn't help your marriage if you are comparing your marriage to everyone else's marriage. It doesn't help your children if you're putting all this extra pressure on them to be like so-and-so's kids, right? So there's this whole bucket of reasons that are somewhat self-focused and not necessarily in a bad way, but like you should stop comparing so that you will have a better life here on earth. But then there's the he reasons. They're the reasons that God tells us to stop comparing. So, frankly, like all these me reasons, like anyone should abide by these, right? It doesn't matter if you're a Jesus follower or not. Like it just makes logical sense that you would take the pressure off your relationships and stop comparing. But then I think what gives it more power, obviously God's word does not return void, like, being in Christ is where our power comes from, right? So the he reasons, the God reasons, these should actually compel us and propel us to a place where we're going to get a little bit more serious about stopping the comparison thing, where we're not going to just be like, oh, shucks, I compare myself. I should really stop that. That's not good for me, right? And we go to a place where we're like, oh, wait a second here. God has something to say about this. Okay, Now I need to wake up and get more serious here because honestly, Sherry, God doesn't use the word comparison in the way we use it in scripture, right? When we talk about comparison, most of the time, what we are doing is we're sugarcoating things like envy and covetousness and pride and jealousy, right? But it's so much nicer to talk about comparison because that doesn't sound nearly as nasty as envy, right? But so the key reasons to stop comparing are connected to what does God actually say about that? And why does God want us to stop comparing? And that ultimately should be what, the answer our heart longs for, right? And the like, oh, okay, aye. I'm gonna get serious about this now.
Well, we can't reflect Him.
Right.
We can't reflect Him if we're comparing.
Right. Right. And so there's, in the book of James, I think it's James chapter 4, James has a list of different sins that separate us, cause dissensions and rivalries and all bad things in the church, right? And so on that list are things like that you'd expect: sexual immorality. There's also orgies, there's witchcraft, but you know what else is in that list? Envy. And that slapped me across the face because I was like, well, man, I grew up in, purity culture where, girls had rings to remind them to not have sex until they got married, right? Or, I knew people that had the swear jar, right? To try to remind them to stop, using God's name in vain or stop, using profane language, right? But envy, like we don't take that as serious as we would like witchcraft. Like those are two different things, right? But oh, wait a second. No, James has them all there on the same list. And so that was a wake-up call to me as I was researching for this book, that like this isn't something God takes lightly. It's not something he chuckles off and says, just keep scrolling and comparing. It's okay. I get it. No, he's like, stop envying. This is harming you. This is harming others. This is harming my church, and we have to stop it.
That's good. That's really good. So I'm going to be 53 pretty soon. And when I was, what a ways, when I was younger, I had these ideals of, what I was going to look like by now, what my social status was going to be by now, where I would be in my writing career by now. And, I had tried to be the perfect mom. I thought that others were, again, without help from social media. And I also thought that, okay, once my kids are grown and gone and I have more time, then I will be able to start focusing on losing the pounds, and I'll always be able to stay dressed nice. My hair will always be done nice, and I'll be able to keep my house in tip-top shape because I won't have kids all over. Just so the listener knows that none of that has happened. But anyway, none of it.
Your hair looks good.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You can watch this on YouTube. If you're listening, go to YouTube.
Watch, you can see Sherry's hair. It's good. It's really good today.
Okay, I love that. Thank you. You call those moments compared to me moments. And I hadn't really thought about that, comparing myself, always comparing myself now to who I think I want to be or who I think I will be in the future. How did you come up with this concept?
Well, so there's memes out there that you've probably seen too, where it's like the only person I can compare myself to is the me I was yesterday, right? And I was processing that, and I know that I work with a lot of women who struggle with aging, like what's happening to their body because of aging. And I'm like, they absolutely will be more stuck if I in any way imply that it's okay to compare yourself to the you were yesterday. And that's not, it's not healthy. It's not helpful. Like, because really in that is comparing yourself to who you were yesterday. Are you closer to your goals? Are you closer to your dreams? Now there is a spiritual way we could do that, right? Like we want to be growing spiritually. We want to be, further down the road as, in sanctification or closer to Jesus than we were yesterday. All of that aside, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about ideals. And so, as I kind of started working through this, recognizing the number of women that also come to me and say, oh, Heather, I don't compare myself to anyone. I just compare myself to the me I want to be. And thinking, okay, is that okay? And then, but wait, what is that? Like, where does that come from? Because we like to think that these ideas in our head were self-populated, right? Like this idea came from deep within me. But that's just not true, right? Like it's influenced by something. It's influenced by someone you knew. It's influenced by a television show you watched. You may not even remember the show, but you latched onto the concept that if that girl looks like that, she gets that boy. And so it's going to be important for me to look like that so I can get that kind of boy, or whatever it would be, for both of us, the mom ideal, right? Like, so part of my thing was, I was like, my friends don't know this, but I was judging my friends that got married and had kids before I got married and had kids, which was a lot of my friends because I didn't get married until I was 31. But I would see them pull out that bag of frozen chicken nuggets and be like, I can't believe you're feeding your children that. I would never say that out loud. but like, when I'm a mom, they're never going to have frozen chicken nuggets. I will make them like these delicious, healthy lunches. Oh, my word, Sherry, we got an air fryer. And that's the trash that I am buying for them because they can heat it up themselves. So my kids are living on taquitos and egg rolls and chicken nuggets, right? And so it's like, And so I have a choice of what to do with that ideal, right? So I can continue to believe that there's this standard that a good mother does not let her children eat that. And I can wake up and, going back to the shame, I can feel shame every day that lunchtime comes and I can't muster making homemade chicken nuggets. I can feel guilt over that. I can sit in that all day long. Oh, what a horrible mom I am. I can't, you know, or I can let it go and realize that once again, these ideals are putting me into bondage where I believe that being a better mom would somehow make my whole life better. Now, again, I'm not saying it's probably be better if I could go cut up vegetables for my kids at lunchtime. Like there's some health things going on there for sure, right? But I don't have to live in the shame and condemnation of not reaching that ideal. That's pressure that God never asked me to put on myself. And I think too often what happens, and see if you can relate to this, we have this list of things that we expect of ourselves. And I will call it for myself the Heather Bible, right? Heather should weigh this. Heather should look like this before she goes out in public. Heather's children should behave like this. And there's all these rules I have, right? And reality is God has given us his word, right? God has an actual Bible of how we should live, right? But when I create the Heather Bible, and this is, oh, ouch, I hate to admit this, but the Heather Bible a lot of times is more important than the God Bible, right? Because when I wake up in the morning, sometimes I'm like, ooh, how do I accomplish what I need to accomplish to keep my image intact or to keep my list of things I need to satisfy myself and feel good about myself intact? And I have to believe that God is saying, hey, over here, I'm not putting all that pressure on you. I'm not expecting all those things of you. Why are you adding to my word? Why are you worshiping your standards more than you're worshiping these things, this limited list of things that I've asked from you? And so I think that's where we get stuck. This idealism actually turns into idolatry that keeps us stuck worshiping ourselves and the list of expectations we have for ourselves instead of being free to pursue our purpose and just do what God asks of us.
I love that. Our ideals can be our idols. That's great. That's awesome. You have a meme out there. I've got to find it because I love it. Of that little grandma saying something like, what does it say?
It's something like, tell me, dearie, when you're 90, will
it matter how hot you were?
How hot you were. Yeah, that's it. Yep. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like women like dieting in their 80s and to look good in their coffin. I mean, it begs the question, like what do you win? I asked a client that the other day. She's struggling with perfectionism. I'm like, what do you win? Let's say you get it all right. What do you win? And she was like, well, honestly, I've gotten a better job and that didn't satisfy me. And I got the raise and that didn't satisfy me. And I got the man and that didn't satisfy me. She's like, I don't know what I win. I was like, well, I think you got to ask yourself that question. Right?
Yeah, I like that a lot. So at the end of each chapter, you have an action plan, which, you know me, I love a good game plan. That's right up my alley. And you say it's so vital for us to have a strategy for when the enemy wants us to think we're not good enough. We have to have a strategy in place. So as we close, what kind of action plan can my listener implement today to discover rest from the burden of better?
Yeah, I think the number one thing you can do is start being more aware of the messages you're hearing in here, but also the signals of your body that tell you that you are stepping into, I'm not even going to call it comparison. I'm going to call it envy, jealousy, pride, covetousness. Because what I've noticed happens for me, and it happened for me in just a way that I didn't even see, acknowledge, or think about for many, many decades. But if you're scrolling Instagram, you can feel fine. And then all of a sudden it's like, ugh, my stomach doesn't feel good anymore. And again, not that you stop and think about it, it's just very subtle. And you keep scrolling and maybe it gets a little bit more like, ugh. And then the messages start. Yeah, if only you looked as good as her. Wow, look at their vacation. Boy, your vacation was lame compared to their vacation. Did you see how many likes she got on that? I mean, she wrote, it was well written, but my gracious, 143,000 likes. Like, you've never even gotten 143 likes on anything, and it starts. And so action plan would be just start by listening to the thoughts and listening to the cues that come from your body. For me, it's stomach. Other people might have it in a different place, but, and responding to them with the truth. Right. So what I have to do is when I step away from Instagram and I have that like queasy stomach and this message start, I have to stop and I say, okay, what am I feeling anxious about? What am I upset about? Oh, I'm upset because I saw the picture of her after she's lost her 30 pounds or whatever. Okay. And what am I doing with that? I'm taking her picture and I am putting that on myself and I'm saying I should be losing 30 pounds. Okay. Is that the truth? Well, maybe God does have some health goals for me in that arena, but no, it's not the truth that that's what God wants me to focus on right now today, right? Can I free myself from that's not the path I have to be on? I know that God has done a huge work in my life to take me off of that following the next diet path. So I have to remember the work he's done in my life. No, wait, God's freed me from that. He probably doesn't want me to go back into the diet bondage. And then just kind of talking through myself with then adding the truth. Like, God says my value is more than just what I look like. So it doesn't matter how I look compared to her. My value is more than my body. My worth in his kingdom is more than that. God has gifted me with certain things to use for his kingdom that doesn't require me to look like her in order to do that. And just so that's just an example of how I do it. But learning to take those, listen to those thoughts, take them captive too. I didn't use those words specifically, but say, nope, that's wrong. And then replace it with truth.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me today and blessing our listeners. And all the things we talked about are going to be in the show notes. So thank you, Heather.
My pleasure, Sherry. Great to be with you.
I really had to stop and digest Heather's concept of the me reasons or the he reasons. We cannot reflect God when we are burdened with reflecting someone else or being something we were not created to be. Links to connect with Heather, find her podcast, and her books are in the show notes. Have you subscribed to this podcast? If not, please do so. That way you do not miss any up-and-coming episodes, and I value your feedback. When you leave a rating and a review, it helps to get the word out about the podcast. It also lets me know how I can continue to serve you. During today's episode, did a friend come to mind who you know would be blessed? If so, I would love it if you'd share a link with them. Listeners like you sharing links with others is how this podcast can reach more people. I'd love to hear from you. Ways to connect with me are in the show notes or simply at 𝗺𝗠𝒠𝒠𝒏.com. Thanks again for listening to Your Spiritual Game Plan, the podcast that shares God's plan and your purpose in it.